My name is Mary. I'm 64 years old, and for most of my life, I believed that love was measured by patience, especially when it came to children. You raise them, you sacrifice for them, you let them grow, and when they build families of their own, you step back and give them space. At least that's what I told myself. For 10 years, I live in a quiet little town in Connecticut, the kind of place where the seasons change slowly and the neighbors wave when they pass by. My house sits at the end of a narrow street lined with maple trees. It's the same house where my son, Daniel, grew up. Every corner holds a memory. The pencil marks on the kitchen wall where I measured his height, the backyard where he learned to ride a bicycle, the front porch where I waited for him after school every afternoon. Sometimes I walk through those rooms and I can still hear his laughter, or maybe that's just my heart remembering. Daniel was my only child. After his father passed away 20 years ago, it was just the two of us. We were close, very close, or at least I thought we were. When Daniel married Emily, I was genuinely happy for him. She was beautiful, smart, ambitious. I welcomed her into our family with open arms. I helped plan the wedding. I paid for things I couldn't really afford. I spent months making sure everything was perfect because I wanted my son to have the life he deserved. And when they moved into their first home, I brought over homemade meals and boxes of things they might need. Extra blankets, kitchen supplies, family photographs, little pieces of love. Emily always smiled politely, but looking back now, her smiles never quite reached her eyes. At first, everything seemed normal. The calls became less frequent, but that happens when people are busy. The visits became shorter, but newlyweds need time together. That's what I told myself, again and again. Whenever my birthday came and Daniel forgot to call, I made excuses for him. He's working hard. Life is stressful. He'll remember tomorrow. Tomorrow became next week. Next week became next month. Then another year passed. I remember sitting alone at my kitchen table one birthday evening. A small cake sat in front of me. Just one candle. I had bought it myself. Outside, rain tapped softly against the windows. I kept checking my phone every few minutes, waiting, hoping, believing. The call never came. Around midnight, I blew out the candle and whispered, "Maybe next year." I laughed when I said it, but then I cried, the kind of crying that happens when nobody is there to see it. The years kept moving. Holidays became different. Christmas invitations stopped arriving. Thanksgiving dinners became stories I saw later in photographs online, pictures of smiling faces around tables where there was no place set for me. I would stare at those photos longer than I should have, searching, wondering, asking myself what I had done wrong. Nothing ever made sense. Whenever I called Daniel, our conversations felt rushed. "Mom, we're busy. We'll visit soon. Things are hectic right now." Always soon. Soon became another month, then another year. One afternoon, I gathered enough courage to ask him directly, "Daniel, is everything okay? I feel like I never see you anymore." There was a pause, a long pause. Then his voice came back softer than before. "Mom, Emily just likes keeping things simple." Simple. I remember staring at the phone after he hung up. Simple. I thought to myself, what exactly does that mean? Was I making life complicated? Was my love inconvenient? The more I paid attention, the more I noticed a pattern. Every decision seemed to revolve around Emily, where they spent holidays, who they visited, how often they called, everything. And somehow I was always the person left out. Not because anyone said it directly. That would have hurt less. No, this was quieter, more subtle, like slowly fading from a photograph, year after year, until one day people hardly noticed you were gone. I still kept trying. I mailed birthday cards. I sent Christmas gifts. I left cheerful voicemail messages. I never wanted Daniel to feel guilty. I never wanted him to choose between his wife and his mother. So I stayed silent. I swallowed my disappointment. I carried my loneliness like an old coat, heavy, familiar, hard to take off. Then came my 63rd birthday. I remember that day clearly. The house was completely silent. No calls, no texts, no knock at the door, just silence. As evening settled outside my windows, I sat in my living room holding an old photo album. Daniel was smiling in every picture. A little boy covered in birthday cake frosting, a teenager holding his driver's license, a young man graduating college, my son, my whole world. I ran my fingers across those photographs and asked myself a question I had spent 10 years avoiding. What if they weren't busy? What if they simply stopped thinking about me? The thought hit me harder than I can describe, because a forgotten mother doesn't disappear all at once. She disappears slowly, one missed call, one canceled visit, one forgotten birthday at a time. And that night, for the first time in 10 years, I stopped making excuses. I stopped telling myself stories. I stopped pretending everything was fine. Something had changed, something I could no longer ignore. And deep down, I had a feeling that the truth waiting for me was far more painful than loneliness itself. I just didn't know that the answers would arrive sooner than I expected. And when they did, they would change everything. After that birthday, something inside me changed. Not all at once, not dramatically, just quietly. Like a light switching on in a room that had been dark for years. For the first time, I stopped spending my days waiting for my phone to ring. I stopped checking the mailbox hoping for a card. I stopped telling myself that next month would be different, because deep down I already knew the truth. If someone wants you in their life, they find a way. And for 10 years, my son and his wife had found countless reasons not to. The hardest part wasn't the loneliness anymore. It was the realization that I had built my entire life around people who no longer made room for me in theirs. One morning, I stood in my kitchen holding a cup of coffee. The house was silent. Sunlight spilled through the windows, illuminating every corner of the room. The old clock ticked softly on the wall. For years, I had viewed that silence as a punishment, but that morning, it felt different. It felt honest. I looked around and saw something I hadn't noticed before. Everything in that house existed because of my sacrifices. The mortgage had been paid by my hard work. The retirement accounts had grown because I worked extra shifts and skipped vacations. The savings in my bank account represented decades of discipline. Every dollar had a story. Every dollar had cost me something. As I walked through the rooms, memories followed me. The family trips I never took because Daniel needed help with college tuition. The hobbies I abandoned because there was always another expense. The dreams I postponed because being a mother came first. Always first. I never regretted those choices. Not then. But standing there alone, I couldn't ignore a painful question. Had anyone ever sacrificed for me? I thought to myself. When was the last time someone asked what I wanted? The answer frightened me. I couldn't remember. Weeks passed, then months. Instead of waiting for my son, I began paying attention to myself. I joined a local book club. I started taking long walks by the shoreline. I met people who knew nothing about my family history, people who saw me as Mary, not simply someone's mother. And for the first time in years, I felt something unexpected. Freedom. It was small at first, fragile, but it was there. Then came the afternoon that changed everything. Daniel called unexpectedly. The sound of his voice immediately caught me off guard. "Mom," he said, "Emily and I are nearby. We thought we'd stop by." I almost laughed. Months had passed since I'd seen them, yet suddenly they wanted to visit. Still, I said yes. Of course I did. They're family. A few hours later, they arrived. Emily looked polished, as always. Daniel seemed distracted. The visit felt awkward from the moment they walked through the door, like strangers trying to remember old conversations. I made coffee. We sat in the living room. We talked about weather, traffic, work, everything except the distance between us. Then Emily asked to use the restroom. A few minutes later, Daniel stepped outside to answer a phone call. I remained in the kitchen cleaning coffee cups. That's when I heard their voices. Not clearly at first, just pieces, fragments, then enough to understand. The back door had been left slightly open. I wasn't trying to listen. But once I heard my name, I froze. Emily's voice carried across the patio. Have you asked her yet? Daniel sounded uneasy. No. Then when are you going to do it? Silence. My heart began to pound. I couldn't explain why. Then Emily spoke again. We need to know what she's planning to do with the house and the money. The cup nearly slipped from my hands. Money. The house. Not me, not my health, not my life, not 10 years of absence. Those were their concerns. I stood perfectly still, unable to move, unable to breathe. Then came the words that shattered something inside me. Emily sighed. Daniel, let's be realistic. She lives alone. She doesn't need all of it. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. 10 years. 10 years of forgotten birthdays. 10 years of canceled visits. 10 years of silence. And now they had time for me because they were thinking about what I owned. Not who I was, what I owned. The realization hit me with breathtaking clarity. I had spent years wondering what I had done wrong, but this was never about me. I wasn't being forgotten by accident. I had simply stopped being useful, and once that usefulness faded, so had their attention. I returned to the kitchen table and sat down. My hands were shaking, not from anger, not even from sadness, from certainty. For the first time in years, everything made sense. When Daniel came back inside, I looked at him differently. I still loved him. That would never change. A mother's heart doesn't work that way. But love and illusion are not the same thing, and my illusions were finally gone. The visit ended shortly afterward. They hugged me goodbye. Emily smiled. Daniel promised to call soon. I smiled back, calmly, politely. Neither of them knew that something had ended that afternoon. Not my love, but my waiting. The moment their car disappeared down the street, I walked back inside. The house felt different. Larger somehow, lighter. I sat alone in my living room as the evening sun painted golden shadows across the floor. And for the first time in 10 years, I made a decision entirely for myself. A decision no one saw coming. A decision that would change the course of my life. I wasn't going to spend my remaining years hoping to be remembered. I wasn't going to beg for a seat at anyone's table. I had sacrificed enough, waited enough, cried enough. The future that lay ahead belonged to me. And if my son and daughter-in-law believed I would stay exactly where they had left me, they were about to discover just how wrong they were, because within a few months, I would be gone. And when they finally came looking for me, there would be nothing left but questions. The day I left Connecticut, it was raining. Not a heavy storm, just a gentle rain that blurred the edges of the world outside my car window. I remember standing in the empty living room one last time. The house echoed differently without furniture, without photographs, without the life I had spent decades building. For a moment, I just stood there, listening. The silence no longer felt lonely. It felt peaceful. I looked around and whispered goodbye, not because I hated that house, not because I was angry, but because I finally understood something. A home is not the place where you wait to be loved. A home is the place where you feel alive, and I hadn't felt alive there in a very long time. I locked the front door, placed the key in an envelope for the realtor, and drove away. Just like that. No dramatic announcement, no final argument, no desperate phone call. I simply left. The house sold faster than expected. The investments I had carefully protected over decades continued to grow. Between the sale, my retirement accounts, and savings accumulated from a lifetime of hard work, I had more than enough money to start over. For years, I had viewed those savings as security. Now they became freedom. I moved to a quiet coastal community several states away, a place where nobody knew me, nobody knew my son, nobody knew my history. For the first time in decades, I wasn't someone's mother. I was simply Mary, and that felt strangely wonderful. The mornings became my favorite part of the day. I would sit near the water with a cup of coffee, watch the sun rise over the waves, listen to seagulls drifting across the sky. Simple things, beautiful things, things I had rushed past for years. I joined local groups, made friends, traveled, read books that had sat untouched on my shelves for decades. I laughed more, slept better, breathed easier. Sometimes I would catch myself smiling for no reason, and every time it happened, I thought to myself, so this is what peace feels like. Months passed, then nearly a year. Not once did Daniel call. Not once. That hurt. Of course it did. But it also confirmed everything I already knew. If my disappearance hadn't immediately concerned them, then our relationship had been broken long before I left. Then one afternoon, everything changed. I was tending flowers outside my small cottage when my phone rang, an unfamiliar number. I almost ignored it. Almost. But something told me to answer. The moment I heard Daniel's voice, my stomach tightened. Mom? Just one word. One simple word. Yet it carried years of distance. Years of silence. Years of things left unsaid. His voice sounded different. Panicked. Fragile. Mom, where are you? I didn't answer right away. I looked toward the ocean. The waves rolled steadily across the shore. Calm. Unbothered. I've been right here, I said quietly. There was silence. Then his voice cracked. We've been looking for you. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Looking for me. After all those years, after all those forgotten birthdays, after all those empty holidays, now they were searching. Now they were worried. Part of me wanted to laugh. Another part wanted to cry. Instead, I simply listened. Over the next few minutes, Daniel explained everything. The house had sold. Neighbors didn't know where I'd gone. The phone number they had was disconnected. Letters had been returned. At first, they assumed I was traveling. Then months passed. Eventually, panic set in. For the first time in years, they couldn't find me. And suddenly, my absence mattered. A week later, they came to see me. I agreed. Not because I owed them anything, but because I owed myself closure. The meeting took place at a small cafe overlooking the water. I arrived first, sat near the window, watched the waves. My hands were steady. That surprised me. After everything that had happened, I expected anger, bitterness, resentment. Instead, I felt calm. When Daniel and Emily walked through the door, I barely recognized them, not because they had changed physically, but because I was seeing them clearly for the first time. Daniel looked older, tired. Emily seemed nervous, uncertain. For a long moment, none of us spoke. Then my son did something that nearly broke my heart. He cried. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly, the way grown men cry when they finally stop pretending they're okay. I'm sorry, Mom. 4 words. Simple. Powerful. Painful. I stared at him. The little boy from my photo albums, the child I had loved with every piece of my heart, the man who had forgotten me, both existed at the same time, and somehow that made everything harder. Emily apologized too. She admitted mistakes, admitted selfishness, admitted things she should have said years earlier. I listened, not because apologies erase pain, they don't, but because listening felt better than carrying resentment forever. For a long time, we talked, honestly, more honestly than we ever had before. When it was finally my turn to speak, I looked directly at them. I never wanted your money, Daniel said softly. I nodded. Maybe not, I replied, but you stopped wanting me. The silence that followed was enormous. No one argued. No one defended themselves, because some truths arrive without needing proof. Tears filled Daniel's eyes again, and in that moment, I realized something important. Closure isn't revenge. It isn't making someone suffer. It isn't watching people regret their choices. Closure is understanding your own worth. It's recognizing that someone else's failure to value you does not reduce your value, not even a little. For years, I had waited for permission to matter. I waited for phone calls, invitations, attention, love. Now I understood something I wish I had learned sooner. My worth was never theirs to give, and it was never theirs to take away. When we said goodbye that afternoon, I hugged my son. I truly did, because despite everything, I loved him. I probably always will. But this time, the hug felt different. Not like a woman desperately holding on to what remained, but like a woman finally standing on her own feet. Whether he called tomorrow or not, whether our relationship healed completely or not, whether Emily changed or not, I would be okay, because my happiness no longer depended on being chosen by people who once forgot me. As I walked back toward the shoreline, the sun was beginning to set. Golden light stretched across the water. The wind carried the scent of salt and summer. I stopped for a moment and looked out at the horizon. 10 years ago, I thought losing my family's attention meant losing myself. I was wrong. Sometimes, the most important person you find is the person you become after everyone else stops looking. And standing there, watching the waves disappear into the distance, I finally understood that this wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of the life I should have been living all along.